Hey there, fellow historians. It's me, and it's time to do some history. As I stare at the blank canvas before me, my mind drifts to every line on a map. Each is a story. Where one nation ends, another begins. Sometimes a border follows a river. Other times it traces mountains or deserts. But many borders have a less obvious origin story. Some are just the result of deals made by kings or mistakes from centuries ago, and all of them affect the lives of millions. Welcome to Origins of Nation, where we uncover the hidden story behind borders. Stay tuned. So here's a question for you. What is a border? You might be thinking something obvious, like the line that separates your country from another. But think harder. What's the point of a border? Who decides where a country starts and stops? As it turns out, borders are not natural. They're human creations. Sometimes they follow physical geography, like that river I mentioned earlier, the Rhine, which naturally forms a boundary between several European countries. Or take the Himalayas. The tallest mountain range on Earth also happens to be a sort of border, separating China from India and Nepal. These borders are fairly easy to understand. A big body of water or a tall mountain range can make an excellent barrier. People have been using these natural borders for thousands of years. But here's the thing, most borders didn't come about because of geography. Take the borderline between France and Spain. No river, no mountains. So why is there a line separating these two countries? Well, in this case, the border is the result of a treaty. Two countries decided to end one to start the other somewhere along the way. That's right, borders are human creations, and humans are complicated. Borders reflect that. In fact, borders are everywhere. They define states, provinces, counties, even cities. They decide everything from where you pay taxes to where you go to school, what passport you use, even what language you speak. Borders decide who is a citizen and who is a foreigner. They help make nations into nations. And sometimes they can even cause war. Okay, so now that we know what borders are and what they do, let's dig into their history. The first empires that we hear about in world history, like the Assyrians, Babylonians, and Persians, kind of just, well, existed. We don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out how they got their territory, but it usually involved being really good at war and conquering lots of people. For example, the Romans didn't really worry about drawing neat lines on a map. They just went around conquering all of Italy and then all of the Mediterranean. But eventually, Rome became huge, and the Emperor Hadrian decided he needed a way to keep track of all this land. In the year 128 AD, he ordered a wall to be built across Britain, starting near the North Sea and ending in the mouth of the Thames River. Hadrian's Wall was a physical line of defense, but it was also a sort of border, dividing the known world of Rome from the barbarians beyond. It was the first real border in the Western world. And as long as there have been borders, there have been stories. The Romans weren't the only empire to expand. North of the Black Sea, another superpower rose to prominence. The Mongols were the largest contiguous land empire in history. They stretched from eastern Russia to the Persian Gulf, from Siberia to Turkey. Under the great Khan, Genghis Khan, the Mongols were unstoppable. They were the ultimate border busters. Genghis Khan took over lands as far away as Poland and the Pacific Ocean. He welded Central Asia together for the first time in history. But he wasn't interested in drawing borders. To Genghis Khan, the whole world was his empire. He ruled everything and everyone. There were no borders within the Mongol Empire. But after Genghis Khan died, his empire broke apart. His successors divided up his lands among themselves, creating weak and fractured states that were constantly fighting over territory. Suddenly, borders mattered again. Before the Mongols, they hadn't. The lesson here is that borders depend on who's in charge. Back then, when one person controlled it all, there was no need for borders. When there were many rulers, borders were back. Meanwhile, in Europe, the medieval period brought back the old ways. Rulers married, conquered, and died. Borders shifted with every change in power. Sometimes they moved a little, like when France gobbled up Normandy in 911. Other times they changed a lot, like when the Ottoman Turks invaded southeastern Europe in the 1300s. By the late 1700s, European powers had carved up the rest of the world. This era is called the Age of Exploration and Colonization. European ships and explorers were scouring the globe looking for new lands and resources. But these explorers were not just discovering new places, they were also claiming them for their country. Whoever arrived first could claim a continent or island for their king or queen, and if another ship showed up from another country, well, too bad. The first explorer won. Soon, European powers were dividing up the world without even asking the people who lived there what they thought. Take Africa, for example. By the 1900s, the entire continent was divided among European rulers. But Europeans didn't divide Africa for Africans. They divided it for themselves. The Berlin Conference of 1884 is a great example of this. Also called the Congo Conference, it was a meeting between European leaders to decide how to colonize Africa. The leaders of France, Belgium, Britain, Portugal, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Turkey met up in Berlin to figure out how to divide up the continent. They drew lines on a map and agreed that whoever controlled this piece of Africa could make its laws, collect taxes, and basically do whatever they wanted. They didn't care about rivers or mountains. They just drew lines wherever they wanted and claimed all the land for themselves. After the conference, Africa would be home to 54 different countries. None of them had anything to do with each other. It was a disaster waiting to happen. And still today, we see the results of the Berlin Conference in modern Africa. Many countries are filled with rival groups who hate each other. Nigeria is a great example of this. It's home to hundreds of different groups who speak different languages and have different religions. And imagine if you put all of your school rivals in the same classroom. That's kind of what happened in Nigeria. Other parts of the world fared no better. In 1916, Britain and France secretly agreed to divide up the Ottoman Empire, the Middle East. This deal was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The British would get control of the region of Mesopotamia, and the French would get Syria. They also agreed to carve up Palestine and the city of Jerusalem itself. The three regions would be put under international control. But everyone knew that Britain and France would just fight over it anyway. The agreement stayed secret until after World War I. Once the Ottoman Empire had collapsed, Britain and France raced into the Middle East to set up shop. They ignored the people who lived there and the deal they made. In the process, they helped create modern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Israel, and Palestine. All of these countries trace their borders back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. These borders are less than 100 years old, yet they've already caused dozens of conflicts. But perhaps the strangest example of hasty borders is right next door. Before 1947, India was a part of the British Empire. But after World War II, Indian leaders demanded independence. Britain agreed, but it only gave them a few weeks to prepare. On August 15, 1947, India became independent, but its borders were hastily drawn by British officials. No one knows this for sure, but many historians believe that the border was drawn by a British official named Sir Cyril Radcliffe. He was a judge with no experience in geography or colonialism. He spent only days creating borders that cut across rivers, valleys, and important religious sites. In total, he drew roughly 2,000 miles of borders. The border cut across villages, splitting families and friends apart. Millions of Indians and Muslims fled to the side that matched their religion. One of the largest mass migrations in history followed. It was a disaster, and it continues to haunt South Asia today. As you can tell, many of today's borders were not drawn by the people who live there. They were drawn by colonizers who just happened to arrive first. The next time you look at a map, remember that those lines are there because of deals made by powerful countries. And those deals were made without asking you. Well, that brings us to the end of our episode. Borders are all around us, but we rarely think about them unless something crosses the line. They're like the air we breathe. We notice them only when we can't move freely. But as we've seen, borders don't have to be barriers. They can be bridges. They can connect us to other cultures and places. Just remember, borders are human creations. And humans are capable of amazing things. We can build walls, but we can also tear them down. Thanks for coming on this journey with us. If you enjoyed this episode of Origins of Nations, please remember to subscribe for more historical tales. We bring history to life with new episodes every week. Until next time, stay curious.